issues, topics in the region and Arab issues. Here, we are going to talk about the latest Israeli elections. And of course, as you remember, we talked about it around 3.5 years before now in April 2019. I think it was appropriate back then, and it is now it is important to tackle this topic in order to discuss the repercussions on the Palestinian cause, the region, and also the relations between Israel and countries outside the region. Throughout the last 4 years, Israel witnessed five successive elections. In 2019 alone, there was two elections. There were two elections in April 2019 and September 2019 as well. The division back then centered on the persona of Netanyahu. There was no political program that was the source of the division, but it was the persona of Netanyahu, and the same thing continued throughout these years until we reach the elections that we are going to talk about today. The Israeli society shifted towards the right, and of course, so we know that the Zionist movement ruled for 3 decades, since 48 till 77. During this lecture, of course, Dr. Azmi Bishara is well placed to talk about this topic. So during this lecture, we are going to talk about the different aspects relating to the latest Israeli elections. What does it mean, the fact that the Israeli society is moving towards the right. So the division is between the right and the extreme right. And we are going to talk about the repercussions, the results, the outcomes, and the government that Netanyahu is going to form for the next 4 years. So the repercussions for the Palestinian cause and in the region. Dr. Azmi, of course, does not need to be introduced, but I would like to introduce him anyhow. He is the Director General of the Arab Center, and he is the head of the Board of Trustees of the Doha Institute. He is a well-known intellectual, Arab intellectual, who published in several journals, magazines, and he has several books in philosophy, and he has a book about the civil society and also Arab democracy and religion and secularism and historical overview. Also, books about revolution, army, and politics, and also Arab specimens, and also about freedom, about sectarianism, denominations, and about Salafism, and also ISIS, and also answering the question about populism. And I know that Dr. Azmi is working on a book now about the state. Dr. Azmi also worked about or worked on the history of revolutions and archiving since 2012 in Tunisia, in Syria as well. Some of these books, most of these books, have been translated or are currently being translated into Arabic. Of course, the revolution about Egypt, the revolution about Tunisia, or the book about the revolution in Tunisia and in Egypt, both of them were translated already. And there are several other publications. I'm not going to name them all. You can actually visit the website of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. And now I give the floor to Dr. Azmi Bishara to deliver his lecture. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marwan. I would like to thank the unit, and I would like to thank you all for attending. Thank you for being here, and I would like to thank the policy or politics unit. And when we talked about this, I said that last year I had a lecture. They said the lecture was 3.5 years ago. So it's crazy. Time is flying, maybe in this country, or maybe as we grow older, we feel time is going faster and faster. I imagine that the lecture was delivered last year. There are things that need to be tackled. I think each and every Arab citizen is interested in this topic. Here we are going to tackle it from a scientific perspective, especially that samples of uh, colonial settlements and also what we're going to talk about now. This is very important for people who want to understand the rise of states, the rise of institutions, the identity, the role of the military. So we are talking about a state at the end of the day, be it legitimate or illegitimate, but we are talking about state institutions. So personally, I am interested in political theory and philosophy, and now I am interested in the topic of the state. So it is very important for us to study the concept, this building of a state, an illegal, illegitimate state. This is some sort of lab that we can make use of in order to study the elements of the state. For instance, in the Arab world, we have the armed factions that result from the revolutions, and also the difficulty to build a state afterwards, or the armed factions that are the result of the sectarian divide in the countries. So this reminds me uh, about philosophy and also social sciences, about the definition of the state that monopolizes the legitimate power or violence, and this is the foundation upon which other state institutions are built. In 48 and 49 in Israel, they had several armed factions. What did they do? They oppressed them, and they built the Israeli army. They did not allow them to continue, not even for a single day. So the order of the day of Ben Gurion, who founded this colonial state, the illegitimate state. So uh, he focused on the fact that the state is the only entity that can use power or violence, and also the relation between the identity and the state institutions. Of course, Israel is the only entity as a state that has control over violence within its institutions, of course, from its own perspective. Of course, we have a military, we have an army, we do not have other armed factions. I would like to remind the brothers in Lebanon and Iraq, etc. So there's a big question regarding the state in the presence of other factions, other armed factions. The fact that there is some sort of rapprochement at the level of the identity, and there's a question about the identity, national identity, and the relation between this and the state. If we say that the state represents the identity of the people, violence is not needed that much. Diversity is common. So there are several factors if we observe the rise of similar entities. Of course, in the past there were colonial entities, but this entity is unique. It is like the South African sample, and it created a regime that is an apartheid-like regime. And I highlighted this topic about or in a book. Today, I'm going to talk about the institutions, the different elements, factors. We are going to talk about the elections. We are talking about a state that had 5 elections in 4 years, and stability was guaranteed. Nothing happened. So the institutions are stable. The central bank is functional. The army has one leadership and the police as well. The other state institutions are functional. The media, the services, the ministries. There is a political divide, political disagreement, but nobody is questioning the state. This is important because we are talking about a state that went through 4 elections and economic growth was not affected. The citizens did not feel that because the political divide is separate from the institutions. From their perspective, we are talking about the science today. Why is it very important? Because we should consider how political divide is actually dividing and leading to the collapse of the states and questioning their very existence. In the Arab Mashriq, there is a political divide that became social and vice versa, and the work of the state institutions is hindered. This is a very important question when we study the result, and we can benefit to understand why is this the situation in Israel while in our countries there is a question mark. Why here the political struggles, political issues and divide is separate from the existence of a state. In my book, I work on the separation between the regime and the state. When does it happen and when does it not happen? Sometimes people talk about treason when people have struggle against the regime. But here there is a big divide as to who is going to rule, but nobody is questioning the state. This is a very important factor for any state in the absence of foreign threat. So the 5th elections in 4 years, of course, the results were equal in the past. We're not talking about left and right. This is mentioned in the media. No, we're not talking about a divide between the right and the left. Of course, the divide in the last 4 years was not a divide between the right and the left. We can talk about the Netanyahu bloc and the anti-Netanyahu bloc. So there was a disagreement regarding the persona of Netanyahu, and especially that he is the longest ruling prime minister from 96 to 99 and from 2009 to 2020 or 2021, the last elections. Yes, June 2021. He is the longest serving prime minister and he is facing corruption charges and there is a divide. In the right, some of the right is ready to be in an alliance with the center, and other members of the right are close to Netanyahu. So here we are seeing 2 equal blocs, and they were not capable of forming a government. Now we have the latest elections, and the bloc of Netanyahu got 64 seats. This is the result. Is it in English? Here it's in English. Perfect. So here is the result. So I had an interview 2 days ago. Of course, I cannot give an example or explain the numbers. Here, if you can see, 1, 2, 3, the third category. So the Zionist, religious Zionism and the Jewish movement. So I will explain what we need by religious Zionism. Religious when we talk about national groups that are religious, usually the nationalists are secular. Only in Israel there is this category. So we're talking about nationalist movement that is religious. So from 6 to 14 in the green, so 8 more seats. 8 more seats. In the bottom, so you see Jewish home. It was 7, now it has 0 seats. All of them became in the religious Zionism and Otzma Yehudit. So we're talking about extremists who lost and extremists who won. So this is within the right. So the third one is right with Netanyahu, and the other is against Netanyahu. We can explain this if you are interested at a later stage. But this is a shift within the extreme right. And the other shift, so the Gantz and Tsar, the national unity. Gantz, of course, launched the war on Gaza in 2014, and he was the manager of the Netanyahu office. So there were 14, now they became 12. They went to the Likud. Likud was 30, now it became 32. These shifts are shifts within the right wing. Why? The right wing that was not capable of forming a government became capable of forming a government because some parties were affected and decided to take this measure. The first thing is that the other bloc that is against Netanyahu was ready to rely on the votes of Arab MPs in the formation of the government. This is why the Jewish home did not get any seat, because they do not accept an Arab coalition or alliance in the parliament. An extreme right party that believes in Israel, the settlements, etc. So they did not accept the Arab votes. So they lost them all. And also the second point is, if you see the Gantz and Saar, my analysis is when there is a strong resistance in the occupied territories and attacks against soldiers, etc., the society shifts toward the right. So the groups that support the idea of security, and we know that there are other parties, and they lost votes in favor of Netanyahu. Why? Because any armed movement in the West Bank results in a shift towards the right and more extremism within the society of Israel. The second factor that affected was the disappearance of left parties. Go with me to the second party, which is Yesh Atid. So here we are talking about right party, or party of the right, the economic level, and there is some left in it, and they inherited the Zionist left, the middle class that wants to live a liberal, secular life when it comes to the personal status, and they are supportive of these right liberal parties that inherited the Zionist left. You see the supporters in Tel Aviv, in the big cities where people want to live a Western lifestyle. They are in favor of peace according to their conditions. So, in my opinion, they are the liberal right. You can see that in 2022, 24, and in 2021 they had 17. Meretz down there. Meretz, this is the Zionist left. There were 6, now it's 0. Where did they get the 17 to 24? So this is within the anti-Netanyahu bloc. We had a shift from the left to the liberals. So the Zionist left had 6, now it became 0. And Labor is the Zionist left. It actually founded the state of Israel, founded the army, was led by Ben Gurion, and launched the war of 67 and 73. The first Intifada was during his rule. So this is Labor Party. So in 2021, they had 7 seats. They used to rule the country even in 67, the first time, or 77, when the Likud reached power. This party was alone, just like Eastern European countries. Now, so they had 7, and in the latest elections, 4. So this boosted Lapid, but of course they accuse the Arabs. In reality, the Zionist left disappeared and weakened this bloc. Of course, the Arabs could have had more MPs, but there is not a big change. So these are lies. So they were 10, they remain 10. So this is basically lies, and I find it strange that Arab TV stations actually say so. So the Zionist left disappeared. Why did Netanyahu win? Arab votes, but they were 10 in 2021 and they are still 10. So now 5 instead of 6-4. So it is true that the Democrats lost. However, without this, the number of Arab MPs did not change, 10, and many of them are ready to be in an alliance with the Zionist bloc represented by Lapid. So be in a coalition or in an alliance, and the government relied on them. So there is nothing to do with the Arabs here. So I hope that this table clarifies the idea. At the end of the lecture, I will be tackling, if we have time, the future of the Arab votes in Israel and the Arab parties. So if people are asking questions, what happened? How did Netanyahu win? So Netanyahu won, and he will form a coalition. And this government does not have necessary to rely on 64 MPs. He might need, in order to reduce the extortion of the religious Zionism, so he might convince MPs from other right parties to join the coalition to reduce this extortion. If you examine this situation, if you are interested, the right parties, the secular right parties, Israel Beituna, so Israel Beitunu, led by Lieberman, and the National Unity, led by Gantz and Saar, and it used to be called Jewish Home, led by the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. So these 3 worked with Netanyahu. I will be talking about it. And they were all managers of Netanyahu's office. And they created parties against Netanyahu. There's a disagreement with Netanyahu. There are several charges pressed against Netanyahu. So these are the accusations, these are the prominent cases against Netanyahu in court. So the liberals who have the uh, principles of Zionism at heart consider that he cannot rule the country even if they use the national demagogy. So shouldn't be allowed to rule. So of course there are other disagreements regarding him ruling unilaterally and marginalizing any other prominent figure, the lies, etc. So his personality and also some criminal cases. However, he insists to keep uh, leading the country. So these are the most important cases. And the second point that is important is the rise of Zionist uh, or religious Zionism. This is one of the most important factors when it comes to the struggle with Israel. After the occupation of 1967, of course, these were the managers of Netanyahu's office. Gideon Sa'ar, Lieberman is well known. He was foreign minister for a while. So now, religious Zionism, which is what I want to tackle, it is important for people who study the religious movements in our countries. Of course, there's a major difference, but I'm talking from a scientific perspective. In this country, where there is no distinction between the nation and nationalism, the religious nation, the Jewish nation is Jewish, being Jewish, or having or, so this as a religion. Of course, uh, the Jewish religion does not welcome people from outside this group. So being member of this group is equal to being member of the Zionist nationalism. At the beginning, people who created Israel led the armed militias against the Arabs. In general, they were seculars. They were socialist movements. They were active in Eastern European countries at the level of the labor movement. They had Marxist ideas. They tried to bring it together with Zionism. They did not agree with the communists, and they did not agree with the liberal Democrats in Western Europe, who considered that the salvation for the Jewish people is through democracy. A secular state, a liberal, democratic, secular state is the solution according to them. So this is one of the different religions. Of course, the objective for those people is to establish, or was to establish, a national state. The leaders were secular from the left, and the religious Jews, of course, there is no deep discussions regarding this topic. I'm talking about people who are interested, or with people who are interested. So the Orthodox movement, the ultra-Orthodox, of course, this is not accurate. This is not accurate because the accurate translation from Hebrew would be the extremist movement. So they wanted to live outside of the city and the Jewish people would want to, and they would wait for the Messiah. The Messiah would save the Jews and establish the kingdom of God. So those people considered that Zionism is actually infidelity and disbelief, and this is blasphemy because they were interfering in the work of the Creator. So for them, uh, they used to consider Zionists as unbelievers. Now we have a few groups in London and New York and also in Israel. But all of the movements used to consider this, and there were Zionist religious individuals, and of course, at the level of the philosophy, there's a difference between the interaction with foreign actors and domestic actors. So they were religious people and nationalists. So they were called the Nafdal. They actually joined the Israeli government and left religion to their private lives. So they were nationalists, they were citizens of Israel. As individuals, they were religious and they did not mix the two aspects. When it comes to the settlement society, so after the creation of the settlements in 1967 in the West Bank, there was something completely new, especially after some sort of feeling, this miraculous feeling that there was a miracle that happened with the victory of 1967. For many, this victory was similar to the interference of God in the world. It was a miracle, and it means that the Zionist movement is miraculous. So they started seeing the nationalist element as religious. Also, the miracle was that the land of Israel has become the state of Israel. So Yehuda and Samara. So we are talking about Nablus and Jericho. Of course, Jerusalem as well. According to them, before 1967, Tel Aviv and Haifa, this is something completely different. But when they occupied in 1967, there was a match between the historic land of Israel and the state of Israel. So the nationalist movement became higher. So now we had religious and religious Zionist movements actually. I wrote about it in my book, and I expected that the Zionist religious movement is going to be on the rise and get the majority in Israel.
Now, their social base seems little 450 settlers in Jerusalem, around 220,000. This number of settlers in Jerusalem, this is in the West Bank without Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, there is 220 to 230,000. Half of East Jerusalem is settled for Jewish settlers. This is East Jerusalem, not West Jerusalem. So far as this is concerned, unlike what I call the orthodox or extremist religious movements, these ones they serve in the army. The others they don't. the extremist religion did not recognize Zionism. They are not very active in the economy except for the banking service. In agriculture or industry, they're not very active. These are like the early settlers. They join the army, they work in agriculture and in industry too. So if the others did not constitute a danger for Arabs and Palestinians, these are at the heart of this danger. The is in the beginnings, the elite units of the Israeli army were members of the kibbutz, and they join the army. They become generals and commanders of the army. This is being. I just want to show you Smotrich. This is not his name. This is a name of a town in the Ukraine. He is from the Ukraine. This is where he gets this name from. This is the leader of the religious Zionist party, and the other, Mar Bingvir, is of Kurdish origin. He was part of the Kach movement, and very briefly, he was a terrorist. He used weapons against civilians, and he organized groups to oppress Arabs. His last adventures were last year, May last year, when the uprising or the agitation to defend the dignity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Arabs took part in that in Jerusalem and other areas. There were militias, Jewish militias, who attacked Arabs in Tel Aviv, Jaffa, and Jerusalem and others. They belonged to him. And he focuses on establishing militias on the Palestinian Arabs inside the 48 areas, and he wants to, he considers loyalty and allegiance to Israel as the condition for citizenship, and no other loyalty or allegiance is allowed. And the idea of Meir Kahane, the Rabbi Meir Kahane, started, and the United States considered him as a terrorist. And after the attack on the Abrahamic Mosque by Baruch Goldstein, who was a follower of Baruch Goldstein, and his attack led to considering the Kach movement as a terrorist organization. So, practically speaking, for all intents and purposes, he is considered a terrorist. And of course, they're very provocative. All settlers are provocative, in fact, when they carry out attacks on individuals, houses, armed attacks, and and I think the Israeli terrorist organizations, the Jewish terrorist organization, whose members were arrested, and even Israel arrested them, and they were aiming to destroying the Aqsa Mosque. And he was among the people who were at that when the rabbis issued edicts killing rabbin, sorry, and they issued this edict to kill Rabin because he was, in their opinion, he was relying on the votes of 5 Arab members in the Knesset, and he was accused of giving Israeli land to Arabs. And for this reason, there were demonstrations which shook the basis of the grassroots support for Rabin, and that was at that time a number of martyrdom operations by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in 1994 and 1995, which destroyed the peace process and led eventually to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. But of course, Shimon Peres's intelligence, in fact, saved or salvaged the situation, but this is another matter. The other topic I want to raise is the extremist groups, the Haredim, as they called in Hebrew. The Haredim parties in Israel, it's important for us to know in which direction Israel is heading, static, even demographically, because they multiply in large numbers. The number of Haredim in Israel, these are the ones who are extremists and do not serve in the army, and there are attempts to convince them to work. They don't do any job, they just get allowances to study the religious texts. Now they are convincing them of joining the high-tech industry. This is their number, also the estimates about their increase in their numbers. If you have the time, or if you're interested enough, you can refer to these slides. The number of now the rate of births is higher than Arabs. They consider increasing their numbers and fertility a religious duty, and it's not right that the Arabs' birth of rate is higher than them. There was a time when this group was more focused on their own issues, and they were neutral politically. They used to go to the Knesset to impose their conditions on the type of food, with Dene Kashrut, kosher food, and others. And even in New York, they have successes in this field. In Dubai, too, somebody tells me. In the last 2 decades, now they have their second and third generations, and they were born in Israel, lived in Israel, and they used to be in the past anti-Zionist. Now they are part of Israeli racism. And a large number of them, especially from Eastern countries, they lived in our countries as a religious group, a religious sect. But the atmosphere of Israeli-Palestinian struggle turned them into Zionism and sometimes ultra-Zionism. And now they're playing a negative role in this regard. This is so far as the extreme is concerned. This is not fixed. There are variables, but by and large, their tendency, as I see it, is a tendency towards the right. Now they are divided into 2 parts. The authentic, if we can call it that, who started these religious parties. They are by and large from Eastern European countries, because the ones who lived in the United States and the UK did not immigrate to Israel. They have their ghettos until now. Mostly they are from Eastern European countries. In the late 70s and early 80s, some used to live with second generation Moroccan or Iraqi Jews, and they mixed together and they picked up this extremist attitude. And and they have the chief rabbi in Israel, who was from Ovada Yosef, and he defected to the other side, and he gradually changed the extremist religious discourse with he linked it with the Oriental culture, conservative Oriental culture, as we are saying. We used to live in Iraq and Morocco, and these are like they do not represent our identity. We are Eastern Jews, and they took they divided the Likud's grassroots, and some of them belong to the movement known as Shas, which are like they represent Eastern Jews, but they are extremists. Some harbor illusions in the Arab world that maybe they can have some sort of an allegiance to their original countries. Maybe, and it's just a big maybe, it may not may apply to the first generation, or may have applied to the first generation if you are very, very flexible. Maybe they had some sort of a nostalgia towards the life that in the second and third generations they don't even know Arabic. They ones some may serve in the army, some may not. The identity here for this is constructed identity. The Eastern identity of these